The ballroom was lit like a palace from a fairy tale, but there was nothing magical about the tension simmering beneath the glitter. 1,000 crystals dangled from the golden chandelier above, scattering beams of light across the polished marble floor, where a red carpet had been rolled out for the richest and most powerful names in the city. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a spectacle, a union between one of the wealthiest billionaires in the country and a woman who had fought her way into the social elite. Cameras were stationed at every corner, documenting every detail for magazines and society pages. Guests dressed in gowns and tuxedos whispered behind jeweled hands, their eyes glittering with envy and intrigue. The bride was radiant, or so it appeared. Her dress shimmered with pearls and hand-sewn diamonds, her long veil trailing like a river of light behind her. But behind her perfectly painted smile was a nervous tension that only the closest observers might have noticed. She wanted everything flawless. Everything. Tonight was her night, and she wouldn't let anyone or anything steal even an ounce of her spotlight. The groom, tall, dark-haired, his jaw cut from stone, stood near the stage, greeting guests with polite nods, though his eyes betrayed something restless. People whispered about him too. He was powerful, intelligent, ruthless in business, but softer with those who knew him privately. Or at least, that's what the world believed. The orchestra was playing softly when the incident that would stain the night forever unfolded. A maid, barely noticed among the sparkle of diamonds and silk, hurried across the edge of the ballroom. She was no older than 22, her uniform pressed but plain, her brown hair tied back in a bun that couldn't hide the exhaustion etched across her young face. She carried a tray of champagne flutes, her hands shaking slightly under the weight. Her body had grown heavier these last months, and it was becoming harder for her to move, as swiftly as her employers expected. She shouldn't have been working tonight at all. She knew it. Everyone who saw her knew it. Her belly was beginning to swell, a subtle curve beneath the fabric of her uniform, a secret she thought she was hiding. But secrets never remain hidden forever, especially not in a world built on wealth and whispers. As she approached the guests near the stage, her foot caught the corner of the carpet. It was the smallest mistake, the kind no one should have cared about. But the tray tilted, glasses slipped, and in a moment that seemed to stretch forever, a golden spray of champagne splashed onto the edge of the stage. Drops of liquid spotted the bride's pristine gown. Gasps tore through the air. The orchestra faltered. Cameras clicked in eager cruelty. The bride turned, her eyes narrowing into sharp blades. The room froze, all eyes fixed on her as she stared at the trembling maid. The young woman bent quickly, trying to wipe the spilled liquid with her hands, whispering apologies under her breath. But it wasn't enough. With the suddenness of a storm, the bride lifted her manicured hand and struck the maid across the face. The sound echoed against marble walls, louder than the music, louder than the whispers. The maid staggered, her hand flying to her cheek, her other arm wrapping instinctively around her stomach, as if to shield the life growing inside her. Her eyes widened, glassy with tears. The guests gasped again, but this time no one dared step forward. Not the men in tuxedos, not the women in shimmering gowns, not even the groom, who stood stiff, his jaw clenched tight. The bride's voice sliced the silence. "Useless girl?" she hissed, her fury pouring out in front of everyone. "On my wedding night, you dare ruin this moment." The maid's lips trembled. She wanted to apologize, to beg for mercy, but the lump in her throat made it impossible. Tears burned in her eyes, and she looked desperately around the room, but found only a sea of judgmental stares. Some guests looked away, ashamed. Others leaned forward with curiosity, hungry for scandal. No one moved to help. The billionaire's mother shifted in her seat, her expression unreadable, but even she stayed silent. The maid's chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath. Her cheeks stung, her ears rang, her baby twisted inside her as though responding to the violence. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the marble floor and escape the humiliation. But something inside her snapped instead. Her gaze lifted, and though her tears still shone, there was a sudden clarity in her eyes. A strength she hadn't known she possessed filled her trembling voice as she whispered, barely audible, but sharp enough to pierce the silence. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. The bride froze. The guests leaned in. The maid's words, though quiet, carried weight. Her hand pressed protectively against her stomach, and for the first time that night, she stopped trembling. She lifted her face, her tear-streaked cheeks catching the chandelier's light, and her eyes locked with the groom's. What she whispered next wasn't just a cry for dignity. It was a truth that would shatter everything in that glittering hall. Her lips parted, her voice cracking but steady, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The silence that followed her words was suffocating. Every chandelier crystal seemed to stop shimmering. Every violin string in the orchestra seemed frozen mid-bow. Guests stood like statues, their champagne glasses half raised, their painted smiles suspended, as though time itself refused to move forward, until someone spoke. The maid's trembling voice had been barely louder than a whisper, but it carried across the marble hall like thunder. "This is your child inside me." Oh, her hand pressed firmly over her stomach, her chest rising and falling with the effort of courage. A murmur rippled through the crowd, like a wave breaking against the shore. First a gasp, then the hushed voice of one woman, then the feverish whispering of many. People turned their heads, their jeweled earrings swaying, their expensive colognes perfuming the air as they leaned toward one another. The scandal was too delicious to ignore. The bride's face drained of its carefully applied color. Her crimson lipstick no longer seemed elegant, but grotesque against the sudden paleness of her cheeks. Her manicured fingers trembled as she held her gown away from the spilled champagne, her eyes darting between the maid's tear-streaked face and her hand resting protectively on her belly. For a moment, she tried to laugh it off. Her voice was sharp, brittle, and desperate. "What nonsense! She's nothing but a servant. Look at her. She's trying to ruin this day, my day." She turned to the guests, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Pay no attention. This girl doesn't know her place." But the guests weren't looking at her. Their eyes had shifted to the groom. He hadn't moved since the maid's words fell into the air like a curse. His face was unreadable, his jaw tight, his fists clenched at his sides. The tension in his body was visible even under his tailored tuxedo, his broad shoulders stiff like stone. The bride's laughter faltered. "Tell them," she demanded, her voice cracking. "Tell them she's lying, that she's trying to humiliate us." Still, the groom said nothing. The murmurs grew louder. Someone in the crowd whispered, "She does look pregnant." Another voice hissed, "Is it possible?" Another, "Scandalous, imagine the headlines tomorrow." The maid swayed slightly, the adrenaline mixing with exhaustion. Her hand shook as she touched her swollen cheek, where the slap still burned hot. She hadn't meant to speak out, not like this, not here. For weeks she had swallowed her truth, hiding her growing belly beneath oversized uniforms, hiding her emotions behind lowered eyes. But that slap, humiliation in front of hundreds, had unlocked a fire inside her she couldn't contain, and now the fire burned too brightly to smother. The billionaire's mother suddenly stood from her front row seat, her regal figure commanding attention. She was dressed in emerald green silk, diamonds glittering against her throat, her silver hair swept into an elegant knot. Her eyes, sharp and piercing, fixed on the maid. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice steady, echoing through the still hall. The maid's lips quivered, but she nodded. Yes. A collective gasp swept the room. The bride spun toward the groom again, her voice shrill. Tell them? Deny it? You cannot. But the groom finally spoke. His voice, low and hoarse, silenced the room more effectively than any scream could have. She's not lying. The bride stumbled back a step, as though she had been struck. Her hand clutched the pearls around her neck, her chest heaving. What? Her voice cracked, higher now, filled with panic. The guests erupted. Some gasped loudly, others whispered feverishly, and a few pulled out their phones, eager to capture the moment that would soon sweep through the tabloids and social media. The orchestra sat frozen, instruments in hand, but forgotten. The bride's perfectly rehearsed image was unraveling thread by thread. She had spent months planning every flower arrangement, every dish, every song on the playlist. But no one cared about her diamonds now. No one cared about her gown. All eyes were on the maid, the girl she had slapped into the spotlight. The maid's tears flowed freely now, but she stood tall, her hand still firm against her stomach. I kept your secret, she said, her voice breaking, but her words carried in the silence. I worked in silence. I carried this child alone, because I trusted you. Her eyes turned to the groom, who stood frozen in guilt. But she humiliated me, and humiliated our baby. I won't be silent anymore. The bride let out a strangled cry, her face twisting into a mask of rage and desperation. You pathetic liar, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the maid. You'll ruin everything. She's trying to destroy us. She turned back to the groom, her voice rising to a shriek. Say something. Defend me. Defend our marriage. But the groom didn't move. His silence was more damning than any words. The guests now watched with open fascination. Some women clutched their pearls, others whispered to their husbands. Imagine the scandal, one murmured. On the very wedding day, another replied. A few even smirked, delighted to see the mighty bride brought low. The bride lunged toward the maid, her hand raised again, but this time the groom caught her wrist mid-air. Gasps erupted again, louder than before. His grip was firm, his voice dark and steady. Enough. The bride froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. Yo, you're taking our side. The groom didn't answer. Instead, his gaze shifted to the maid, his expression torn between guilt and sorrow. She's not lying. He repeated, louder now, his words slicing through the whispers. That child is mine. The ballroom exploded in noise, gasps, cries, whispers, shouts. Some guests covered their mouths. Others grabbed their phones. The bride staggered back, her veil slipping off her shoulder, her carefully curated world crumbling in front of everyone she had wanted to impress. The maid's legs wobbled, but she stood her ground. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just a servant carrying trays and cleaning up after others. She was the center of the room, the one holding the truth that no wealth, no diamonds, no powerful connections could bury anymore. And as the noise swelled around her, she realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the bride, not of the guests, not even of the man who had betrayed her. Because tonight, the truth had finally spoken, and it was louder than any slap, louder than any lie.